The handcuffs clicked shut around Sarah Mitchell's wrists with a cold finality that sent shivers down her spine. The fluorescent lights of the San Diego police station buzzed overhead as officers processed her for what they called stolen valor, pretending to be a Navy SEAL for personal gain. "Ma'am, impersonating military personnel is a federal offense," Officer Rodriguez said, his voice stern but not unkind. "You're looking at serious jail time." Sarah remained silent, her jaw set in a firm line. At 32, she had weathered storms that would break most people, but this felt different. This felt like the end of everything she had worked so hard to protect. The incident had started 3 hours earlier at Murphy's Bar, a dive establishment popular with military personnel stationed at nearby Naval Base San Diego. Sarah had been sitting alone at the bar, nursing a beer and trying to blend into the shadows. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and boots that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she kept her eyes down, avoiding conversation. But trouble found her anyway. "Hey, look at this wannabe," a loud voice had called out from across the bar. Sarah looked up to see 3 men in their 20s approaching her table. They wore Navy uniforms, their chest ribbons indicating they were fresh out of basic training. The tallest one, with bleached blonde hair and a cocky smirk, seemed to be their leader. "I bet she's one of those fake military chicks," he continued, loud enough for the entire bar to hear. "Probably bought that tattoo online." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her left shoulder, where a small but distinctive tattoo was barely visible beneath her shirt sleeve. It was simple design, a trident symbol with specific details that only certain people would recognize. "I'm not looking for trouble," Sarah said quietly, finishing her beer and standing to leave. "Running away, typical," the blonde sailor laughed. "I knew you were fake. Real SEALs don't run from a fight." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She turned slowly, her green eyes meeting his for the first time. "What did you say?" "You heard me. That tattoo doesn't make you special. Half the girls in this town have fake military ink trying to impress guys like us." The bar had gone quiet now, other patrons sensing the tension building. Sarah could feel every eye in the place watching her, waiting to see how she would respond. "I never said I was anything," Sarah replied evenly. "I just came here for a drink." "Then explain the tattoo," another sailor chimed in. "That's SEAL ink if I ever saw it, but everyone knows women can't be SEALs, so either you're a liar or you're stupid." Sarah felt her control slipping. Years of training had taught her to manage her emotions, to stay calm under pressure, but something about their smug assumptions made her blood boil. These kids, barely out of their teens, talking about things they knew nothing about. "Maybe you should mind your own business," she said, her voice carrying a warning that the young sailors either didn't hear or chose to ignore. "Or what?" The blonde one stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You gonna fight me? Show me some of those special SEAL moves." That's when Sarah made her mistake. Instead of walking away, instead of maintaining her cover, she let her training take over. When the sailor reached out to grab her arm, her response was instant and devastating. The first attacker found himself on the floor before he knew what hit him, gasping for air as Sarah's precisely placed strike knocked the wind from his lungs. The second sailor rushed her, only to discover that his opponent moved like water, redirecting his momentum and sending him crashing into a nearby table. The third sailor was smart enough to back away, his hands raised in surrender. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from across the bar. "Did you see that?" But Sarah's display of skill only made things worse. Within minutes, the bartender had called the police, claiming she was some crazy woman pretending to be military. By the time the officers arrived, the story had transformed into something completely different. The young sailors, embarrassed by their defeat, painted Sarah as an unstable woman who had attacked them unprovoked while claiming to be a Navy SEAL. They showed the officers her tattoo, explaining that she was clearly mentally disturbed and dangerous. She said she was Special Forces, one of them lied convincingly. Started talking about all her missions and how she could kill us with her bare hands. Sarah knew she couldn't tell the truth. Her real story was classified at levels these local police officers would never have clearance to hear. So she remained silent as they arrested her, letting them believe she was just another case of stolen valor. Now, sitting in the processing room, Sarah wondered if her silence had been the right choice. The officers were treating her with the mixture of disgust and pity reserved for those who dishonor military service for personal gain. "Look, Sarah," Officer Rodriguez said, consulting her ID. "We see this kind of thing more often than you'd think. People get caught up in the fantasy, start believing their own lies, but impersonating a SEAL, that's crossing a line." "We've got witnesses saying you claim to have combat experience," his partner added. "Multiple tour, special operations, the works. Problem is we ran your name through the system. No military record at all." Sarah almost smiled at that. Of course they wouldn't find her record in their system. Her file was buried so deep that most Pentagon officials didn't have clearance to access it. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to remove your shirt so we can photograph that tattoo as evidence," Officer Rodriguez said professionally. "Then we'll be transferring you to federal custody." As Sarah complied, revealing the intricate tattoo on her shoulder, she noticed Rodriguez pause. His eyes narrowed as he studied the design more carefully. "Mike, come look at this," he called to his partner. The second officer approached, and both men examined the tattoo in silence. Sarah could see wheels turning in their minds, recognition dawning slowly. "Where exactly did you get this done?" Rodriguez asked, his tone suddenly less certain. Sarah met his eyes but said nothing. She had made a promise long ago, and she intended to keep it, no matter what it cost her. The processing room door opened, and a desk sergeant poked his head in. "Rodriguez, there's been a development. Admiral Morrison is here, says he needs to speak with your suspect immediately." Sarah's heart stopped. Admiral Morrison, she hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in over 3 years. Admiral Morrison entered the processing room like a force of nature. At 61, he still carried himself with the bearing of a man who had commanded respect in the world's most dangerous places. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his dress blue uniform immaculate, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing. The local police officers straightened instinctively, recognizing authority even if they didn't understand its full scope. Sarah kept her head down, but she could feel his presence filling the room like an electric charge. "Gentlemen," Admiral Morrison said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I understand you have a situation here." Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat nervously. "Yes, sir. We arrested this woman for stolen valor. She was involved in an altercation where witnesses say she claimed to be a Navy SEAL. She has what appears to be military tattoo work, but we can't find any service record for her." Admiral Morrison nodded slowly, his eyes moving to Sarah for the first time. She felt his gaze like a physical weight, memories flooding back despite her efforts to suppress them. "May I see the tattoo in question?" the Admiral asked. Rodriguez gestured to Sarah's shoulder, where the intricate design was still visible. Admiral Morrison stepped closer, his expression unreadable as he studied the ink. The tattoo was small but incredibly detailed. At first glance, it looked like a simple trident, the classic SEAL symbol. But Admiral Morrison could see details that the local officers had missed. The specific shading, the subtle additions that marked it as something more than standard military ink. "Interesting," he said quietly. Then louder, "Officers, I'm going to need some time alone with your suspect." "Sir, we can't just," Officer Rodriguez began. "This is now a matter of national security," Admiral Morrison said, producing credentials that made both officers step back. "I'm assuming custody of this individual effective immediately." The authority in his voice brooked no argument. Within minutes, Sarah found herself alone in the room with the one person she had hoped never to see again. Admiral Morrison waited until the door closed before speaking. When he did, his voice was softer, carrying years of history and regret. "Hello, Sarah." She looked up for the first time, meeting his eyes. "Hello, Admiral." 3 years, he said, settling into the chair across from her. 3 years since you disappeared. Do you have any idea how many people have been looking for you?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Looking for me, or looking to clean up loose ends?" "You know better than that." Morrison's voice carried a hint of hurt. "After everything we've been through, you think I'd throw you to the wolves." "Wouldn't be the first time the Navy abandoned its people," Sarah replied, but there was less venom in her words than she intended. Admiral Morrison studied her carefully. Sarah looked older, he realized. The bright-eyed young woman who had walked into his office 8 years ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, more guarded. Her dark hair was longer now, and she had lost weight. But her eyes, those sharp green eyes that had once earned her the nickname Hawk among her teammates, those were the same. "Tell me what happened that night," he said quietly. Sarah's jaw tightened. "You know what happened. You read the after-action reports." "I read the official version. I want to hear it from you." For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. The processing room was sterile and cold, fluorescent lights humming overhead. But in her mind, she was back in the mountains of Afghanistan, 3 years ago, when everything went wrong. "Operation Blackwater," she said finally. "Intelligence said it was a simple extraction. Get in, get the asset, get out, clean and simple." "But it wasn't simple. Nothing ever is." Sarah's voice took on the flat tone of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. "We inserted at 200 hours. Team of 6, myself, Rodriguez, Thompson, Park, Williams, and Jensen. The intel was wrong from the start." Admiral Morrison leaned forward slightly. "How wrong?" "The compound wasn't lightly defended. There were 40 combatants, not 12. The asset wasn't being held in a safe house. He was being tortured in a fortified bunker. And our extraction point was compromised before we even landed." "But you completed the mission." Sarah's laugh was hollow. "We got the asset out. That's what the reports say, right? Mission accomplished." "Sarah, do you know what it costs to get one person out of hell, Admiral?" Her voice was rising now, years of suppressed anger finally breaking through. "Do you know what we had to do?" Admiral Morrison said nothing, letting her speak. "Rodriguez took shrapnel in the chest during the breach. Thompson caught a sniper round in the shoulder, but we pressed on because that's what SEALs do, right? We complete the mission." She stood up, packing to the small window that looked out onto the police station parking lot. "The asset was barely alive when we found him. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, barely conscious. And the intel we were supposed to recover, it was already gone. The whole thing was a setup from the beginning." "You couldn't have known that." "Couldn't I?" Sarah turned back to face him. "I raised concerns about the operation during briefing. The timeline was too tight, the intelligence too convenient, but nobody wanted to hear it from the woman on the team." Admiral Morrison winced. It was an old wound, one of many that the military was still struggling to heal. Female SEALs were a recent addition to the teams, and not everyone had adjusted their thinking. "Thompson didn't make it to the extraction point," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bled out about 2 clicks from the compound. Jensen stayed with him, tried to stop the bleeding, but..." She trailed off, lost in the memory. "The helicopter came under fire during extraction," Admiral Morrison said quietly. "You stayed behind to provide covering fire." "Someone had to. Rodriguez was unconscious, Park was trying to keep the asset alive, and Williams was our pilot. That left me and Jensen." "But Jensen was hit." Sarah nodded, took a round through the neck, dead before he hit the ground. "So you held the line alone." "For 47 minutes, Sarah said. 47 minutes of keeping 30-plus hostiles pinned down while the helicopter got clear with the wounded." "How did you get out?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't think I would. Used up most of my ammunition, had maybe 6 rounds left when a second helicopter came back for me. Turned out Williams had radioed for backup despite orders to maintain radio silence." Admiral Morrison nodded slowly. "Williams filed a report recommending you for the Navy Cross. Said you single-handedly saved the lives of 4 men and completed an impossible mission." "And you buried it." The accusation hung in the air between them. Admiral Morrison sighed deeply. "The operation was classified beyond top secret. The asset we extracted had intelligence about terrorist funding networks that reached into several allied governments. Giving you public recognition would have meant revealing details that could have compromised national security and gotten more people killed. So instead you gave me a desk job and hoped I'd disappear quietly. I gave you time to heal, both physically and mentally." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I sat, it looked like punishment for being too good at my job." Admiral Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder, placing it carefully on the metal table between them. Sarah recognized the red classification stamps and security warnings immediately. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Sarah glanced at the folder but didn't answer. She had learned long ago that silence was often the safest response when dealing with classified materials. It's your complete service record, Morrison continued. All of it, including the parts that officially don't exist. He opened the folder, revealing photographs, commendation letters, and mission reports. Sarah caught glimpses of familiar faces and places she had tried hard to forget. Operation Neptune's Fury, Morrison said, pointing to one photograph. Your first mission with SEAL Team 7. You were 23 years old, fresh out of training, and you successfully infiltrated a terrorist compound in Somalia that had stumped our best intelligence analysts for months. Sarah remembered that mission. It had been her chance to prove herself, and she had been terrified of failing. The compound had been built like a maze, designed to confuse intruders, but Sarah had found patterns in the chaos that others had missed. Operation Glass House, Morrison continued, flipping to another section. You spent 6 weeks undercover in Syria, posing as a relief worker while gathering intelligence on chemical weapon stockpiles. The information you provided prevented 3 separate attacks on civilian populations. Each mission brought back memories Sarah had tried to bury. The people she had saved, the friends she had lost, the impossible decisions she had been forced to make. Operation Blackwater, Morrison said finally, reaching the most recent entries. The mission you think defines you as a failure. It does define me, Sarah said quietly. 2 good men died because I wasn't fast enough, wasn't smart enough to see the trap. 2 good men died because they were soldiers, and sometimes soldiers die in war, Morrison replied firmly. But 4 other men lived because of your actions. The asset we extracted provided intelligence that prevented a coordinated terrorist attack on 3 European capitals. Over 10,000 innocent lives were saved because of what you did in those mountains. Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she fought them back. Then why did you bury me in a desk job? Why did you make me feel like I was being punished? Admiral Morrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. For the first time since entering the room, he looked his age. Because I made a mistake, he said simply. I thought I was protecting you. After Blackwater, there were questions being asked at the highest levels of government. Some people thought female SEALs were a liability, that they weren't emotionally or physically capable of handling the stress of special operations. And you believed them? No, Morrison said firmly. But I knew that if I put you back in the field immediately, every mission would be scrutinized. Every decision you made would be questioned. I thought if I gave you some time in administration, let the political heat die down, then I could bring you back stronger than ever. Sarah stared at him. You didn't tell me that. I couldn't. The people asking questions had security clearance. If they knew I was planning to put you back in the field, they would have found ways to make your life difficult, maybe even dangerous. So instead you let me think I was being sidelined. I let you think what you needed to think to stay safe. Sarah stood up and walked to the small window again. Outside, she could see normal people going about their normal lives, completely unaware of the shadows that existed in the world around them. What happened after I disappeared? She asked. Morrison sighed. Officially, you were listed as having resigned from the Navy for personal reasons. Your security clearance was suspended pending a routine review that somehow never got completed. And unofficially, I've had people looking for you for 3 years, quietly, carefully, but looking nonetheless. Sarah turned back to face him. Why? Because 6 months after you disappeared, something happened that changed everything. Morrison reached into the folder again and pulled out a single photograph. It showed a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, standing next to what appeared to be a terrorist leader Sarah recognized from intelligence briefings. Richard Blackwood, Morrison said, Deputy Director of Intelligence at the CIA. It turns out he was selling classified information to terrorist organizations for over 5 years. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The asset from Operation Blackwater was one of Blackwood's contacts. The entire mission was designed to eliminate someone who could expose Blackwood's network. We weren't supposed to extract him alive. The room seemed to spin around Sarah as the implications hit her. Thompson and Jensen died for nothing. No, Morrison said forcefully. They died because they were betrayed by someone they trusted, but their deaths weren't meaningless. The intelligence we gathered from that asset eventually led us to Blackwood. He's currently serving life in federal prison. Sarah sat down heavily, her mind racing. How many people knew about Blackwood? That's the million-dollar question. We know there were at least 3 other high-ranking officials involved, but we're still uncovering the full scope of the conspiracy. And you think some of them are still out there? Morrison nodded gravely. Which is why when you disappeared, I was actually relieved. If you had stayed in the system, you might have been targeted for elimination. So you let me become a ghost. I let you stay alive. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she had learned. The anger she had carried for 3 years was slowly being replaced by a different emotion, not quite forgiveness, but understanding. The tattoo, she said finally. You recognized it immediately. Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the room. Special ink, isn't it? Changes color slightly depending on the light and temperature, only used for deep cover operatives in case verification is needed. Sarah looked down at her shoulder. She had gotten the tattoo during her final mission preparation, never imagining it would someday be the only proof of her real identity. There are only 12 people in the world with that specific design, Morrison continued. All of them are SEAL Team 7 members with the highest possible security clearance. Sarah corrected quietly. Thompson and Jensen are gone. Which leaves 10, and every one of them is considered a national treasure. Sarah laughed bitterly. Some treasure. I've been living in a studio apartment in Oceanside, working as a bartender under a fake name. Actually, that's not entirely true. Morrison reached into the folder one more time and pulled out a bank statement. Sarah's eyes widened when she saw the balance. Your military pay has been accumulating in a special account for 3 years, he explained. Plus hazard pay, combat bonuses, and interest. The Navy takes care of its own, Sarah, even when they can't tell them about it. Sarah stared at the numbers, hardly believing what she was seeing. Enough money to buy a house, to start a new life, to do whatever she wanted. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Admiral Morrison's expression grew serious again. Because we need you back. Sarah felt her world tilt on its axis. You want me back? Admiral Morrison nodded. 6 weeks ago, we intercepted communications suggesting that Blackwood's network had a fail-safe plan. If their operation was ever discovered, they would activate sleeper cells in major American cities. How many cities? At least 8, possibly more. Sarah sank back into her chair, the magnitude of what Morrison was telling her slowly sinking in. What kind of attacks? Coordinated strikes on civilian targets. Shopping malls, schools, hospitals. They want to create maximum chaos and casualties. And you think I can help stop them? Morrison leaned forward. Sarah, you know these people better than anyone alive. You've studied their methods, infiltrated their operations, and understand how they think. The asset from Operation Blackwater gave us pieces of the puzzle, but we need someone who can put it all together. Sarah stood up and began packing again, her mind racing. 3 years of trying to forget, 3 years of building a new life away from the violence and death, and now it was all rushing back. There are other operatives, she said. The rest of Team 7 other SEAL units, why me? Because the remaining members of Blackwood's network know the faces of every active SEAL. You've been off the grid for 3 years. As far as they know, you're either dead or completely out of the picture. So I'm expendable again. You're invisible, Morrison corrected. There's a difference. Sarah stopped packing and turned to face him. What exactly are you asking me to do? Admiral Morrison opened the folder to a new section, revealing surveillance photos and detailed intelligence reports. We've identified 3 key figures who we believe are coordinating the sleeper cell network. Each one is in a different city, Los Angeles, Miami, and Houston. We need someone to get close to them, gather intelligence, and help us roll up their operations before they can launch their attacks. Deep cover work. The deepest. You'd be completely on your own, no backup, no official support. If something goes wrong, the Navy will deny any knowledge of the operation. Sarah looked at the photographs. 3 faces stared back at her, a businessman in Los Angeles, a university professor in Miami, and a shipping company owner in Houston. They looked like ordinary people, the kind you might pass on the street without a second glance. How long do we have? Intelligence suggests they're planning to move in the next 6 to 8 weeks, possibly sooner if they suspect we're onto them. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. 3 years ago, she had walked away from this life, vowing never to return. She had built something resembling peace in her small apartment, working her quiet job, trying to heal from wounds that went deeper than flesh. But now, thousands of innocent lives hung in the balance. "What about my legal situation here?" she asked, gesturing around the police station. "Already handled. As far as the San Diego Police Department is concerned, you were released into federal custody for questioning related to an ongoing investigation. The stolen valor charges will be quietly dropped." "And the sailors who started the fight?" Morrison's expression hardened slightly. "They've been transferred to different units and given very stern lectures about the dangers of making assumptions. They won't be bothering anyone else." Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Thompson and Jensen, about the promise she had made to their families to honor their memory. She was thinking about the 10,000 people in Europe who were alive because of Operation Blackwater. She was thinking about the children who might be in shopping malls or schools when the sleeper cells activated. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want some guarantees." "Name them." "First, no more lies. If you're sending me into danger, I want to know everything, the real intelligence, the real risks, the real exit strategy." "Agreed." "Second, when this is over, I want a choice. Not a desk job, not a forced retirement, but a real choice about my future." Morrison hesitated. "That might be difficult to arrange, given the classified nature of—" "Then we don't have a deal," Sarah said firmly. The Admiral studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You'll have your choice." "Third, I want to see the families of Thompson and Jensen. I want to tell them the truth about how their men died." "Sarah, their deaths are still classified." "Find a way," she interrupted. "Those families deserve to know that their loved ones died as heroes, not as casualties of a training exercise." Morrison was quiet for a moment, then slowly nodded. "I'll see what I can do." Sarah walked to the window again, looking out at the world she was about to leave behind once more. 3 years of relative peace, of ordinary concerns like paying rent and dealing with difficult customers. 3 years of trying to convince herself that she could be normal. But normal had never really suited her. "There's something else you should know," Morrison said quietly. "Rodriguez is alive." Sarah spun around, her heart hammering. "What?" "Miguel Rodriguez, your teammate from Operation Blackwater. He didn't die from his injuries." "But the report said—" "The report said he was critically wounded and evacuated to Germany for treatment. He spent 8 months in a coma, but he pulled through. He's been working desk duty at the Pentagon for the past 2 years." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. Rodriguez had been more than a teammate. He had been a friend, someone who had accepted her as an equal from the first day she joined the team. "Does he know I'm alive?" "He's the one who suggested bringing you back for this mission." Sarah laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria. "Miguel always was too smart for his own good. He said to tell you that the team isn't complete without its hawk." The old nickname hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had earned it during her second mission, when her ability to spot details others missed had saved the team from an ambush. For 3 years, she had tried to forget that part of herself, the part that lived for the hunt and thrived under pressure. "When do I leave?" she asked. Admiral Morrison smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask that. Transport leaves for Los Angeles in 4 hours." 4 hours? "The situation is more urgent than I initially let on. We intercepted a communication this morning suggesting that the timeline may have moved up. Instead of 6 to 8 weeks, we might only have 3 or 4. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with urgent missions. The civilian world faded away, replaced by the sharp focus of operational planning. "What's my cover identity?" Morrison handed her a new folder. "Meet Dr. Elizabeth Carter, freelance cybersecurity consultant. You have a PhD in computer science from MIT and 5 years of experience working with corporations to protect sensitive data." Sarah flipped through the documents, memorizing details. "This is good work. How long did you have this prepared?" "About 2 years," Morrison admitted. "I've been hoping for a chance to bring you back." "And if I had said no?" Morrison's expression grew serious. "Then I would have respected your decision and found another way. But Sarah, there isn't another way. You're the only person with the skills and knowledge we need." Sarah nodded slowly. The weight of responsibility was settling on her shoulders again, familiar and heavy. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt like herself again. "All right, Admiral," she said, straightening her shoulders. "Let's go hunting." 2 weeks later, Dr. Elizabeth Carter sat in a trendy downtown Los Angeles coffee shop, her laptop open and several cybersecurity textbooks spread across her table. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what her cover identity claimed, a freelance consultant catching up on work between client meetings. But Sarah's trained eyes were constantly moving, cataloging faces, exit routes, and potential threats. After years away from fieldwork, her instincts had sharpened again with surprising speed. Her target sat 3 tables away, completely unaware he was being observed. Marcus Chen looked exactly like his surveillance photos, mid-40s, well-dressed, with the confident bearing of a successful businessman. His company, Pacific Import Solutions, handled shipping containers from Asia to the West Coast. On the surface, it was a legitimate operation that generated millions in revenue annually. Beneath that surface, intelligence suggested Chen was using his shipping network to move money, weapons, and personnel for terrorist organizations. Sarah had spent the past 2 weeks establishing her cover, renting an apartment in Santa Monica, setting up a small office space, and even landing a few actual consulting contracts to make her presence in the city seem authentic. The work had been surprisingly satisfying, using her technical skills for something other than planning military operations. But today was different. Today, she was beginning the most dangerous phase of her mission. Chen's company had recently posted a job opening for a cybersecurity specialist, someone to audit their systems and implement new protection protocols. Sarah had applied 3 days ago, submitting a resume that was impressive enough to get attention, but not so perfect as to raise suspicions. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Ms. Carter, this is Rebecca from Pacific Import Solutions. Mr. Chen would like to schedule an interview for the cybersecurity position. Would 2 p.m. today work for you?" Sarah smiled slightly as she typed her response. "That would be perfect. I look forward to meeting with Mr. Chen." 3 hours later, Sarah sat across from Marcus Chen in his corner office, a space that screamed expensive taste and attention to detail. Floor-to-ceiling, windows offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles Harbor, where massive container ships dotted the horizon like floating cities. "Your resume is quite impressive, Dr. Carter," Chen said, reviewing the carefully crafted document. "MIT, several high-profile corporate contracts, excellent references." "Thank you, Mr. Chen. I've always believed that cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about understanding how people think and behave." Chen looked up from the resume, his dark eyes studying Sarah with an intensity that made her glad for all her years of training in maintaining cover identities. "Interesting perspective. Can you elaborate?" Sarah leaned forward slightly, projecting the confidence of someone passionate about their field. "Most security breaches don't happen because of technical failures. They happen because someone manipulates a human being into providing access. Social engineering, phishing attacks, insider threats, these are the real vulnerabilities in any system." "And how would you address those vulnerabilities?" "Multiple layers of protection. Technical safeguards, yes, but also employee training, access controls, and continuous monitoring. The key is creating a culture where security is everyone's responsibility, not just the IT department's." Chen nodded slowly. "Our business involves some sensitive client information, shipping manifests, customs documents, financial records. How would you ensure that information remains protected?" Sarah sensed an opening. "What kind of threats are you most concerned about? Corporate espionage, government surveillance, criminal infiltration?" For just a moment, Chen's expression flickered. It was subtle, a slight tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible pause before responding. But Sarah caught it. "All of the above, I suppose. In today's world, you can never be too careful." "Absolutely. In fact, I recently worked with a shipping company in Seattle that was dealing with some unique challenges. They suspected their systems had been compromised, possibly by organized crime groups trying to track high-value shipments." Sarah was lying, of course, but she watched Chen's reaction carefully. His hand moved unconsciously to his desk drawer, a tell that suggested he was nervous about something hidden there. "Did you resolve their situation?" he asked. "Eventually. It turned out they had a much bigger problem than they initially realized. The criminals weren't just tracking shipments. They were using the company's systems to coordinate other activities. Drug smuggling, human trafficking, even terrorist financing. Chen's face remained carefully neutral, but Sarah noticed his breathing had become slightly more shallow. She was getting close to something. "Terrible," he said. "I hope they were able to clean house completely." Oh, they were. Once we identified the scope of the problem, federal authorities got involved. FBI, DEA, even some agencies I can't name. The investigation is still ongoing, but several key players have already been arrested. Now Chen was definitely uncomfortable. He glanced at his computer screen, then back at Sarah. "Well, I certainly hope we don't have anything that dramatic to deal with here," he said with a forced laugh. "Pacific Import Solutions runs a clean operation." "I'm sure you do," Sarah replied smoothly. "Though in my experience, criminals are getting more sophisticated all the time. They're excellent at hiding their activities behind legitimate businesses." The interview continued for another 20 minutes, with Chen asking technical questions that Sarah answered expertly. But she could tell his mind was elsewhere, probably wondering how much she knew and whether her presence at his company was really a coincidence. As the meeting concluded, Chen stood and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming in, Dr. Carter. We'll be in touch within the next few days with our decision." Sarah shook his hand, noting that his palm was slightly damp with perspiration. "I look forward to hearing from you, Mr. Chen. I think Pacific Import Solutions and I could have a very productive working relationship." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing what she had learned. Chen was definitely nervous about something, and her mention of federal investigations had clearly hit a nerve. The real question was whether his nervousness stemmed from actual criminal activity or simply from the general paranoia that many business owners felt about government oversight. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Admiral Morrison. "How's the fishing?" Sarah typed back, "Fish is biting, need more time to reel him in." Time may be shorter than expected. Intelligence suggests accelerated timeline. Sarah frowned at the screen. "How accelerated?" "Possible activation within 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She had hoped for at least a month to infiltrate Chen's organization and gather solid intelligence. 2 weeks meant she would have to take bigger risks, move faster, and hope that her instincts about Chen were correct. The next morning, Sarah received the call she had been expecting. "Dr. Carter, this is Rebecca from Pacific Import Solutions. Mr. Chen would like to offer you the position of cybersecurity specialist. Can you start on Monday?" "That's wonderful news," Sarah replied. "Yes, Monday would be perfect." "Excellent. Mr. Chen asked me to mention that this position may require some travel and occasionally working with, shall we say, unconventional clients. He hopes that won't be a problem." Sarah's pulse quickened. Unconventional clients. That could mean any number of things, but in the context of a potential terrorist financing operation, it probably meant exactly what she thought it meant. "Not a problem at all," she said. "I've worked with all types of clients in my career. Discretion and professionalism are part of the service." "Perfect. We'll see you Monday morning at 9 a.m. Oh, and Dr. Carter, Mr. Chen wanted me to emphasize that everything you'll be working on is highly confidential. We'll need you to sign some additional agreements regarding non-disclosure." After hanging up, Sarah immediately contacted Morrison through secure channels. "I'm in," she reported. "Starting Monday. Chen is definitely hiding something, and he specifically mentioned unconventional clients and strict confidentiality requirements." "Excellent work. What's your assessment of the timeline?" "If they're planning something big, I should be able to identify it within a week of getting access to their systems. The question is whether I can do it without exposing my real identity." "What do you need from us?" Sarah thought for a moment. "If things go wrong, I'll need extraction options. Chen seems paranoid, and if he starts getting suspicious, this situation could deteriorate quickly." "Understood. Team 7 is standing by in a support capacity. Rodriguez specifically requested to be part of your backup plan." Sarah smiled at that. Miguel Rodriguez had always been someone she could count on. "Tell Rodriguez I said thanks. And Admiral, if my hunch is right about Chen's operation, we're going to need to coordinate with FBI and possibly international law enforcement." This isn't just about preventing terrorist attacks, it's about dismantling an entire network. Agreed, focus on gathering intelligence. We'll worry about the coordination. As Sarah prepared for her first day as a cybersecurity specialist for Pacific Import Solutions, she felt the familiar mixture of excitement and dread that came with dangerous missions. She was walking into the unknown, with no backup and no safety net. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt truly alive. Sarah's hands moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, her eyes scanning lines of code that told a story more sinister than any fiction. 3 days into her job at Pacific Import Solutions, she had gained access to the company's core systems, and what she found there confirmed her worst suspicions. Chen wasn't just facilitating terrorist financing. He was coordinating it across 3 major cells, exactly as intelligence had predicted. Hidden within legitimate shipping manifests and financial records were detailed plans for coordinated attacks on American soil. The office was quiet at 11 p.m., with only security guards patrolling the lower floors. Sarah had volunteered to work late, claiming she needed uninterrupted time to complete her security audit. In reality, she needed access to systems that were only unlocked during off hours. Her fingers paused over a particularly damning file, detailed floor plans of a shopping mall in Houston, complete with security camera locations and guard rotation schedules. Another file contained similar intelligence for a school in Miami and a hospital in Los Angeles. Sarah felt sick as she realized the scope of what she was looking at. These weren't random targets chosen for maximum casualties. They were carefully selected locations where emergency response would be delayed or complicated. The attackers had done their homework. She quickly began copying files to an encrypted drive, her eyes constantly monitoring the hallway through the glass walls of her temporary office. Chen had been friendly but watchful since her first day, occasionally stopping by to check on her progress. She had played the role of the dedicated consultant perfectly, asking the right questions and expressing appropriate concern about the company's complex client needs. But tonight, she had discovered that some of those client needs involved moving explosive devices through the port of Los Angeles. Her secure phone vibrated with a text message. "Working late again, Dr. Carter." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The message had come from Chen's personal number. She looked up to see him standing in the hallway outside her office, still wearing his expensive suit despite the late hour. "Mr. Chen," she said, quickly minimizing the sensitive files on her screen. "I didn't know you were still here." "I often work late," he replied, entering her office without invitation, "especially when we have new team members who might need guidance." Sarah's training kicked in instantly. Chen's tone was too casual, his posture too relaxed for someone making an innocent check on an employee. This was an interrogation disguised as a conversation. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah said, standing to face him. "I'm just trying to get a complete picture of your security needs. Some of your data structures are quite complex." "Yes, they are," Chen agreed, moving closer to her desk. "Perhaps too complex for someone who isn't familiar with our particular type of business." "I've worked with shipping companies before." "Have you?" Chen interrupted, his friendly mask finally slipping. "Because I made some calls today, Dr. Carter, very interesting calls." Sarah's mind raced through her cover identity, looking for potential weaknesses. The documentation was solid. The references were real people who would vouch for her if contacted. But Chen's confidence suggested he had found something. "The MIT alumni directory is quite comprehensive," Chen continued conversationally. "Funny thing, though, they have no record of an Elizabeth Carter graduating with a PhD in computer science. Ever." Sarah felt her cover crumbling but maintained her composure. "Alumni directories aren't always complete. I could contact the registrar's office if you need." "I already did," Chen said with a cold smile. "Very thorough people at MIT. They were quite certain they had never issued a degree to anyone named Elizabeth Carter in their computer science program." The office felt like a trap now, with Chen between Sarah and the door. But years of SEAL training had prepared her for exactly this situation. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sarah said calmly. "Perhaps we should discuss this tomorrow when we can contact MIT together and resolve any confusion." "Oh, I think we should discuss it right now," Chen replied. You see, Dr. Carter, or whoever you really are, you've seen things tonight that were not meant for your eyes. Sarah glanced at her computer screen, where the encrypted files were still copying in a small progress window. 70% complete. She needed more time. I'm not sure what you mean, she said. I've only been reviewing your security protocols as you asked me to do. Really? Then you won't mind if I take a look at what's on your screen. Chen moved toward the computer, and Sarah knew she was out of time. As he reached for her keyboard, she acted. The first strike was to his solar plexus, a precise blow that doubled him over and left him gasping for air. The second was a controlled strike to the base of his neck that would render him unconscious for several minutes. Chen collapsed to the floor, alive but completely incapacitated. Sarah quickly returned to her computer, watching the file transfer reach 90%. Her secure phone was already dialing as the final files copied. Morrison here. Cover's blown, Sarah said tersely. Chen made me, but I have the intelligence. 3 coordinated attacks planned for this weekend. We need to move now. Location: Houston Shopping Mall, Miami School, Los Angeles Hospital. I'm sending you everything now. Extraction. Sarah looked out the office window at the parking lot below. 2 black SUVs had appeared since she arrived, and several men in dark clothing were positioned around the building exits. Complicated, buildings being watched, multiple hostiles. Team 7 is 20 minutes out. Might not have 20 minutes. As if summoned by her words, the elevator chimed softly. Sarah could hear footsteps in the hallway, multiple people moving with military precision. Gotta go, she whispered into the phone, then ended the call. Sarah quickly pocketed the encrypted drive and moved to the window. Her office was on the 8th floor, making jumping impossible, but the building's architecture included decorative ledges that might support her weight. The footsteps were getting closer. She could hear voices now, at least 3 men speaking in hushed tones about securing the floor and finding the asset. Sarah carefully opened the window, grateful that Chen's company occupied a relatively old building where the windows still opened for fresh air. The Los Angeles night was warm and humid, with the distant sound of traffic from the freeway. She climbed onto the narrow ledge, her hands finding purchase on the building's decorative stonework. Heights had never bothered her. SEAL training included extensive climbing and rappelling exercises, but moving along the outside of an 8-story building in business attire was not something she had specifically practiced. Behind her, she could hear the search team entering her office. She was here recently, computers still warm. Check the other offices, she can't have gone far. Sarah moved carefully along the ledge, heading for a maintenance ladder she had spotted during her reconnaissance of the building. Each step required absolute concentration. One slip would mean certain death. She had almost reached the ladder when her phone rang. The sound echoed off the building's facade, clearly audible to anyone within 50 feet. Sarah quickly silenced it, but the damage was done. There, outside the building, shouts erupted from the office behind her, followed by the sound of the window being thrown fully open. Sarah abandoned stealth and moved as quickly as possible toward the maintenance ladder. The first gunshot shattered the night air, the bullet striking stone inches from her head. Sarah dove for the ladder, her hands closing around the metal rungs just as a second shot rang out. She half climbed, half fell down the ladder, her training taking over as she calculated angles and cover positions. The building's loading dock would provide temporary shelter, but she needed to reach street level and disappear into the city before Chen's people could organize a proper search. Her feet hit the ground just as her secure phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. "Hawk, we're here. South parking structure, level 2. Move." Sarah smiled grimly as she ran toward the structure. Rodriguez had always been able to find her when it mattered most. The reunion was brief but emotional. Rodriguez, now sporting a beard and a few more lines around his eyes, pulled her into a quick embrace before ushering her into an unmarked vehicle. "Good to have you back, Hawk," he said as they sped away from the building. "Good to be back, Miguel. Though next time maybe we can try a mission that doesn't involve jumping off buildings." "Where's the fun in that?" As they drove through the Los Angeles night, Sarah felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in years. The intelligence she had gathered would prevent 3 major terrorist attacks and likely lead to the arrest of dozens of conspirators. But more importantly, she had proven to herself that she could still do the job that mattered most, protecting innocent people from those who would do them harm. Admiral Morrison was waiting at the safe house, along with representatives from the FBI and several other agencies Sarah didn't recognize. The next few hours would be spent debriefing and coordinating the law enforcement response to her intelligence. But as she walked into the building, Sarah realized that her real mission was complete. She had faced her past, confronted her demons, and remembered who she really was underneath all the pain and guilt. She was Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL, and she was exactly where she belonged. 3 months later, Sarah stood on the deck of a naval vessel in the Pacific, watching the sun set over calm waters. The terrorist network had been completely dismantled. Chen and his associates were awaiting trial, and the threat to American cities had been eliminated. Admiral Morrison had kept his promise about giving her a choice. She could return to active duty with SEAL Team 7, take a position training new special operations personnel, or retire with full honors and benefits. Sarah had chosen active duty. Some people, she realized, were meant for the shadows, for the dangerous spaces between peace and war where heroes made impossible choices to keep the world safe. Her tattoo caught the light as she raised her hand to shield her eyes from the setting sun. The special ink shifted colors slightly, a subtle reminder of the secrets she carried and the promises she had made. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve. But tonight, surrounded by her teammates and finally at peace with herself, Sarah Mitchell was exactly where she belonged. The Hawk was home,